What happened in Verdun between 1916 and 1917 is real. The voice narrating the story is fictional, to give a face and a heart to the thousands who lived through that hell. This story contains sensitive themes related to war.
Have you ever heard the sound of hundreds of thousands of artillery shells falling in a single day? I have, and that sound never left my ears. You know, what I'm about to tell you follows the real events of Verdun. The names, the dialogues, the personal scenes, those I dramatize. But the horror? That was very real. Good afternoon, my dear listeners. My name is Marcel Dubois, and I am the voice of one among thousands who survived the Battle of Verdun. I don't like talking about it. For decades, I kept these memories as if they were poison I didn't want it spread. But now, seeing how much has been lost to time, I decided to tell it my way, without romanticizing. I'm here in my small house in Meaux, the same town where I was born many decades ago. Through the window, I see children playing in the school garden, free, happy, unaware that their great-grandfathers died so they could have this freedom. And I think someone needs to tell them where the peace they enjoy comes from. Verdun. Just saying that name still makes me tremble. For you, it might just be a name in a history book. For me, it was 300 days of hell on earth, one of the longest and bloodiest battles of the First World War. The place where hundreds of thousands of men died or were wounded in an area too small for such destruction. But before I tell you about hell, I need to tell you about the paradise we lost. I was young when the war began, son of farmers from Meaux, in the Marne Valley. Our life was simple, but good. Papa grew sugar beets and wheat. Mama took care of the chickens and the vegetable garden. I was the eldest of 4 siblings, and everyone expected me to take over the farm when Papa got too old. I loved country life, waking to the rooster's crow, milking the cows before sunrise, working the land with my own hands. I had a girlfriend, Celeste, the blacksmith's daughter. We planned to marry in the fall of 1914. We would have children, continue the farm, grow old together, watching our grandchildren play in the same fields where I had played. The war changed all of that in a matter of weeks. When Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914, no one in Meaux imagined it would affect us. Sarajevo was on the other side of Europe. What did an Austrian archduke have to do with us French peasants? We found out in August. On August 1st, 1914, France declared general mobilization. Every able-bodied man had to report to the army. In 3 days, we transformed millions of civilians into soldiers. It was the largest troop movement in history up to that point. I remember the day I received the draft notice. Papa was in the kitchen drinking coffee. Mama was preparing bread for the oven. A postman brought the envelope with the official government seal. When I opened it, there were just a few lines. Marcel Dubois, you are summoned to serve the homeland. Report to the Meaux barracks on August 2nd at 6 o'clock. Mama cried. Papa was silent, but I saw his hands tremble when he picked up his coffee cup. Celeste came to see me in the afternoon, and we promised to marry when I returned. It'll only be a few months, I said. The war will be over before Christmas. How wrong I was. The Great War, as we called it then, was not like previous wars. It was not a series of quick battles decided by cavalry charges and individual bravery. It was something completely new and terrible. an industrial war, fought with killing machines that humanity had never created before. To understand Verdun, you need to understand how we got there. You know, we only realized too late that this war would be different from everything. In September 1914, Germans and French faced each other near my hometown. The Germans were advancing toward Paris, believing they would conquer France in weeks. But the plan failed. The French army resisted, and the war that should have lasted weeks turned into a race to the sea. Germans and French dug trenches that stretched from Switzerland to the English Channel. Hundreds of kilometers of no man's land, barbed wire, and death. For 2 years, we tried to break through these lines. Battles like Artois, Champagne, Somme, hundreds of thousands dead to conquer a few meters of mud. It was terrible mathematics. For every meter conquered, many men died. In 1916, the Germans decided to try a different strategy. Instead of trying to break through the French lines, they would bleed France to death in a battle of attrition. They chose Verdun because they knew that, out of national pride, we would never abandon that historic fortress. General Erich von Falkenhayn, chief of the German General Staff, calculated coldly, if they attacked Verdun, the French would be forced to defend. It was a strategy of extermination. I was in a trench near Soissons when the transfer orders arrived. "Verdun," said the sergeant. "You're going to Verdun." We didn't yet know what that meant. We thought it was just another troop. Rotation. We took the train from Compiègne on a freezing February morning in 1916. We were 200 men from my company, all young like me, most peasants from around Paris. We sang on the train, told jokes, played cards. We still thought war was an adventure. When we arrived at the Bar-le-Duc station, we discovered we were entering the greatest hell humanity had ever created. The sound began before we reached Verdun, a constant rumble like distant thunder that never stops. It was the German cannons, thousands of shells per day falling on an area that seemed too small for such destruction. It was a noise that entered your bones and never left. From Bar-le-Duc to Verdun, there was only one road, a single dirt road that became the lifeline of the entire French defense. We called it La Voie Sacrée, the sacred way. Thousands of trucks passed through it every day, carrying soldiers, ammunition, food, everything needed to keep Verdun functioning. But it was also through it that the wounded, the dead, the men who had gone mad returned, trucks coming down loaded with bodies while we went up to take their place. Verdun, in February 1916, was a ghost town. The houses had been evacuated, the streets were covered with rubble, and over everything hung a fine dust that was a mixture of pulverized cement and, well, things I prefer not to name. Because, yes, my dear listeners, when artillery shells explode near human beings, little remains to tell. We were housed in an underground casemate that used to be a wine cellar. Thick stone walls, cold, damp, 100 men sleeping in improvised bunks, breathing the same stale air, sharing lice and diseases. The smell was indescribable. Sweat, urine, feces, rotten food, and underneath it all, the sweet, sickening smell that you learn to recognize and never forget. It was there that I met the men who would become my family for the next few months. Jean-Claude Mercier, a primary school teacher from Rennes who recited poetry to distract us from the sound of cannons. Auguste Moreau, a blacksmith from Lille, who repaired our weapons with pieces of metal he found in the rubble. And Philippe Rousseau, a boy from Lyon, barely more than a child, who had lied about his age to enlist. Each carried a family photo in his uniform pocket. Jean-Claude had a wife and 2 small children. Auguste was a widower, but was raising his orphaned daughter. Philippe dreamed of returning to finish his studies and become an engineer. None of them survived Verdun. Our first mission was to occupy a frontline trench in the Fleury sector. To get there, we had to cross 2 kilometers of open field under constant bombardment. We left at 4 in the morning, when the German artillery usually decreased a little. The landscape was lunar. There wasn't a tree standing, not an intact house, not a square meter of earth that hadn't been turned over by explosions. Huge craters filled with dirty water where pieces of uniforms and other things I won't describe floated. The ground was covered with German and French barbed wire mixed together, creating a metal web that tore uniforms and flesh with equal ease. Between the wires, bodies of soldiers who had tried to cross and couldn't. Some were recent, others were just skeletons in rags of cloth. We reached the trench just as the German morning bombardment began. "Préparation d'artillerie," shouted the sergeant. "Everyone down." You have no idea what a modern artillery bombardment is like. It's not like in the movies, where there are dramatic explosions and heroes running between them. It's a mechanical industrial hell, scientifically designed to break not only bodies, but human minds. The Germans had cannons of all types pointed at Verdun, small pieces that fired non-stop, huge mortars that launched giant projectiles, and the larger pieces, monstrous ones that shot at impossible distances. When these projectiles exploded, the earth shook like an earthquake. Men nearby were buried alive by the collapse of the trenches. Others simply disappeared, vaporized by the explosion. I saw a soldier hit directly. There was nothing left of him to bury. But the worst thing wasn't the deaths. It was living in fear 24 hours a day, never knowing if the next shell would fall on you, hearing the whistle of the grenade coming and counting the seconds until the explosion, knowing that if the sound stopped, you were dead. Philippe, our boy from Lyon, developed what we called war neurosis. After a week in Verdun, he could no longer speak. He stayed huddled at the bottom of the trench, shaking uncontrollably, losing control whenever he heard a projectile approaching. Auguste, our blacksmith, tried to care for him as if he were his son. "It'll pass, boy," he murmured, holding Philippe during the bombardments. "It'll pass." But it didn't pass. One morning, we found Philippe dead in the trench. There were no visible wounds, no shell marks. His heart simply stopped beating. The company doctor said it was cardiac failure caused by extreme stress. He was still barely more than a boy. The living conditions were subhuman. We ate once a day when we could. Cold rations, dirty water, moldy bread. There was no way to wash, change clothes, or relieve ourselves with dignity. We used buckets as latrines, and when they overflowed, we simply threw the contents over the trench. The rats were the size of cats. They fed on what they found among the rubble, and then came to get our food. At night, we felt them running over our bodies while we tried to sleep. Jean-Claude said that the rats of Verdun were different from ordinary rats. They had developed new habits in that hell. The winter of 1916 was particularly brutal. Snow, freezing rain, frozen mud. Our trenches turned into rivers of ice and mud where our feet rotted inside our boots. Trench foot, we called it. The flesh simply rotted and fell off, and you were crippled forever. But we couldn't abandon our positions. Word came that General Philippe Pétain had taken command of Verdun's defense and created a rotation system. Fresh troops came in, exhausted troops went out, in constant rotation, so no one stayed too long on the front line. Theoretically, each unit spent 8 days on the first line, 8 on the second line, and 8 resting. In practice, when the situation became critical, we stayed for weeks in the advanced trenches, eating what appeared and drinking rainwater. It was during one of these weeks that I came to know the true face of modern war. It wasn't heroism, it wasn't national glory, it wasn't individual bravery, it was an industrial machine for destroying lives, operated by generals who saw soldiers as numbers on a spreadsheet. You know, as I tell this, I remember a specific day, a day that still wakes me up at dawn, so many decades later. When I close my eyes, I can still see everything as if it were yesterday. It was the day the Germans almost broke through our lines. The day thousands of men killed each other over a piece of land the size of a football field. That's when I learned that hell isn't a place. It's something men create for each other. February 21st, 1916, a date that is engraved on my soul like branding iron. The day hell descended to earth and chose Verdun as its new home. It began at 7:15 in the morning. I was in the front line trench of the Haumont sector, trying to warm my hands over a can with burning alcohol, when the world exploded. It wasn't an ordinary bombardment. It was what the Germans called Trommelfeuer, drum fire. 9 consecutive hours of concentrated artillery, more than 1,000 cannons firing simultaneously, the largest concentration of fire in military history up to that point. Imagine the sound. You can't, because you've never heard anything like it. It was as if 1,000 thunders exploded at the same time without stopping for 9 hours straight. The noise was so intense that men kilometers away were permanently deafened. The earth shook as if being shaken by invisible giants. Century-old trees were uprooted and thrown into the air like twigs. Stone houses built centuries ago disappeared in a cloud of dust. And men simply ceased to exist. Jean-Claude was beside me when a grenade fell near our position. The explosion threw me against the trench wall and knocked me unconscious. When I woke up, he had disappeared. Literally, we didn't even find fragments, just a pool of blood and his wallet with the family photo. Auguste survived the bombardment, but was unrecognizable. An explosion had destroyed part of his face. He could speak, but only from one side of his mouth. Even so, he continued repairing weapons until he died 3 weeks later from an infection in the wound. The German objective was simple and diabolical: completely destroy the French front lines, then advance with tens of thousands of men to take Verdun before we could reorganize. They believed no human being could survive that bombardment. They were almost right. When the artillery fire finally stopped at 4 in the afternoon, I was buried alive. A shell had collapsed part of the trench over me, and I spent hours digging earth with my hands to be able to breathe. When I managed to free myself, I emerged in a world that no longer existed. Haumont had been erased from the map. There were no ruins, no rubble. There was only a field of smoking craters where a village once existed. The trees in the woods were just black stumps emerging from red mud. That's when we heard the scream that froze our blood. German infantry advancing. Through the smoke and dust, we saw gray silhouettes emerging from the German trenches. Thousands of them marching in closed formation, bayonets gleaming under the afternoon sun. They looked like ghosts coming out of a cemetery. We were few surviving French soldiers facing thousands of Germans. Mathematically impossible. But we had one advantage. Our artillery still worked. Colonel Dryant, commanding our sector, managed to establish communication by field telephone with the French cannons positioned behind Verdun. "Fire on our own positions," he shouted. "Shoot at us." It was a suicidal order. He was asking our artillery to bombard our own trenches to stop the German advance. Some of us would die, but it was the only chance to save Verdun. The first French shells began to fall between us and the Germans. Then, progressively, the gunners adjusted their aim and began to massacre the German columns advancing. It was an indescribable carnage. Bodies flying through the air, screams of agony, German soldiers running back to their trenches, leaving thousands of dead on the field. Colonel Dryant died in that attack, hit by shrapnel in the head. His last words were, "Resist to the last man. Verdun cannot fall." We resisted, not out of heroism, not out of patriotism, but because we had no choice. The Germans attacked, we resisted. They retreated, we counterattacked. And in the middle of it all, men died for meters of land that weren't worth the life of a single child. During the following days, the battle became a meat grinder. The Germans conquered a trench, we retook it. They captured a village, we reconquered it. For every meter of terrain, many men on each side died. It was during one of these counter-offensives that I came to know the true meaning of the word camaraderie. I was wounded, shrapnel in my left arm and right leg, and I couldn't walk. Auguste, even with part of his face destroyed, carried me on his back for 200 meters to a first aid station. "Why?" I asked, knowing he was risking his own life. "Because we are brothers," he replied with his deformed voice, "and brothers don't abandon each other." The first aid station was a scene from hell. Gravely wounded men, soldiers who had gone mad and sang children's songs while waiting for care, doctors amputating limbs without anesthesia because there wasn't enough morphine. Dr. Rousseau, a surgeon from Paris who had volunteered to work in Verdun, had been operating for 48 hours straight. His hands trembled with exhaustion, but he kept cutting, stitching, saving lives. "You are the sons of France," he murmured to each wounded man, "and France does not abandon its sons." I spent 3 days in that medical station listening to the reports from the wounded arriving from other fronts. It was said that Fort Douaumont had fallen into German hands. That Fleury changed hands several times a day. The situation was desperate, but then came the news that changed everything. General Philippe Pétain had taken command of Verdun's defense. At that moment, I had been away from home for 2 years. 2 years? When you're young, 2 years seems like an eternity. I had left Meaux as a boy who had never seen violence. Now, I was a veteran with scars on my soul that even I didn't know existed. It was during those days at the medical station that I managed to send my first letter home in months. The paper was dirty with blood, not mine, from a wounded man who died beside me, but I wrote anyway. "Dear Papa and Mama," I began, "I am alive. That's all I can say for now." 3 weeks later, miraculously, I received a letter back. Mama wrote in her careful handwriting that I had known since childhood. "Marcel, my dear son, we pray for you every night. Here in Mo, life continues. Papa planted new sugar beets in the north field. Madame Durand's chickens had chicks. Father Antoine asked about you at Sunday Mass. Chicks. Chickens had had chicks while I watched men explode into pieces. Normal life continued 200 kilometers away while we lived in hell. It was almost impossible to believe that the two worlds existed at the same time, in the same country, under the same sky. I cried reading that letter. I cried because I realized I had forgotten that life existed beyond death, that there were places where people worried about chicks instead of artillery shells. Pétain was different from other generals. He wasn't interested in personal glory or suicidal attacks. His only objective was to keep Verdun French, whatever the cost. And he had a plan. First, he organized the supply. The Sacred Way received thousands of new trucks, fresh food, ammunition, reinforcements. Everything began to arrive regularly. Second, he created the rotation system that kept fresh troops on the front line. Third, and most important, he gave an order that saved thousands of lives. Don't make unnecessary attacks. Defend the ground you have. It was a revolutionary strategy for the time. Instead of sacrificing men in glorious but useless offensives, Pétain preferred to defend intelligently and wait for the Germans to exhaust themselves attacking well-fortified positions. It worked. During the summer of 1916, the Germans continued attacking Verdun, but each attack cost more lives and conquered less terrain. It was mathematics of attrition that favored the French. In June, when I returned to the front line after recovering from my wounds, the situation had changed. We were no longer desperate soldiers resisting an overwhelming enemy. We were experienced defenders, facing increasingly worn-out attackers. But the price continued to be terrible. Every day, trucks descended the Sacred Way loaded with bodies. Sons who would never return home, husbands who left widows, fathers who would never meet their grandchildren. And in the middle of all this, I learned a lesson I've carried for so many decades, that war isn't about heroes and villains. It's about ordinary people forced to do extraordinary things to survive, and that the greatest victory isn't conquering territory, but maintaining your humanity when everything around conspires to destroy it. December 1916. 10 months after the start of the battle, Verdun still resisted, but I was no longer the young peasant who had arrived there in February. I was a war veteran, with hair that was beginning to whiten and eyes that had seen too much. War changes you inside, not just physically. I limped on my right leg because of the shrapnel, and my left hearing was never the same. It changes your soul. You learn to sleep with the sound of cannons. You learn to eat even when there's death around. You learn to kill other human beings and then pray for God's forgiveness. During the fall of 1916, our company was positioned in the Fleury sector. Fleury had been a small village before the war. During the battle, it changed hands many times. French attacked in the morning and conquered the ruins. Germans counterattacked in the afternoon and retook them. At night, both sides buried their dead and prepared to start again the next day. Nothing was left of the village, not even rubble. Just numbered craters on the military map that marked where there had once been houses, church, school. We fought for possession of holes in the ground that no longer had any strategic value. But neither side could retreat, because retreating at Verdun meant admitting defeat. It was in Fleury that I met Pierre Moreau, a soldier from Brittany who became my best friend during the last months of the battle. Pierre was a young fisherman's son and had an inexplicable ability to find humor in the most desperate situations. Marcel, he told me one morning as we ate cold rations under freezing rain, "Do you know the difference between Verdun and hell?" "I don't know," I replied. "In hell, at least you know you're dead." Pierre had lost 2 brothers in the war, one in Artois, another at the Somme. But I never saw him cry or lament. "Crying won't bring them back," he said. "Better to stay alive to tell their stories." He carried a diary in his backpack where he wrote down everything that happened. Not military events, but small human details. Soldier DuPont found a photo of his daughter in the mud today, cried for 10 minutes. Sergeant Petit shared his last chocolate bar with the wounded German recruit we captured. "Why do you write this?" I asked. "Because someone needs to remember we were people, not just numbers in a battle." Pierre died in November during one of the last German attacks. A mortar grenade fell directly in his trench. When we found the body, he was still holding the diary. The last words he had written were, "Cold morning, bad coffee, but the sun rose again today." That has to mean something. I kept his diary for many years. When I die, I want to be buried with it. But it wasn't just the constant death that wore us down. It was the dehumanization. After months of killing and watching friends die, you begin to transform into something different. Some soldiers developed a cold, calculating hatred. Others became indifferent to violence. I became too protective of the people around me. There was a boy in our company, André Lefebvre, barely more than a child. Son of a teacher from Lyon, he had enlisted voluntarily after his older brother died in Champagne. André was everything I had been 2 years before. Innocent, idealistic, believing he was fighting for a noble cause. I knew that if I didn't take care of him, André would die in a matter of weeks. Verdun devoured young idealists like him. So I became his unofficial protector. I taught him how to recognize the sound of different types of projectiles, how to move in the trenches without attracting attention from German snipers, how to sleep even during bombardments. "Why are you doing this for me?" he asked one night after I saved him from falling into a crater full of barbed wire. "Because someone did this for me when I arrived here," I replied, remembering Auguste carrying me on his back. "And because, if we survive, you'll have a whole life to be a better man than this war is trying to turn you into." André survived Verdun. He returned to Lyon, became a teacher like his father, had 4 children, and lived many years. We corresponded throughout our lives. In his letters, he always said that everything he achieved in life he owed to what he learned from me, in those trenches. But not everyone was so lucky. Captain Renault, our company commander, went completely mad in October. He began giving contradictory orders, talking to himself, seeing Germans where there were only ruins. One morning, he left the trench unarmed and began walking toward enemy lines, shouting that he was going to personally negotiate peace with the Kaiser. The Germans didn't shoot him. I think they realized he was insane and felt pity. But our own artillery was doing a bombardment at that moment, and a French shell killed him before he reached the German trenches. That's how I learned that war destroys men in ways you can't imagine, not just physically, but mentally, spiritually. It transforms normal people into killers, saints into demons, brave men into cowards, and cowards into heroes. In mid-December 1916, the main phase of the battle came to an end. The Germans finally gave up trying to take Verdun, not because we had defeated them militarily, but because the battle was consuming resources they needed on other fronts. The Battle of the Somme, which the British had started in July, was draining German divisions. Romania's entry into the war opened a new front in the east. Verdun had become a hemorrhage that Germany could no longer sustain. When the moment came that the intense fighting ceased, I was in a front line trench that was 300 meters from German positions. For 10 months, we had killed each other over those 300 meters. Thousands of men on both sides had died for a piece of land where not even grass grew anymore. The silence was deafening. After 10 months, hearing cannons day and night, the silence seemed unnatural, haunted. For a few moments, I thought I had gone deaf. Then I began to hear other sounds. Birds singing, the first birds I had heard in many months. Wind blowing through the barbed wire, and coming from the German trenches, something impossible, someone playing harmonica. It was a German melody I didn't recognize, but it was beautiful, melancholic and hopeful at the same time, as if the musician was saying goodbye to something terrible and greeting something better. Pierre would have liked that. He would have written in his diary, "War lessened at Verdun today. German played music for us. That has to mean something." You know, as I sit here telling all this, I keep thinking how difficult it was to return home after Verdun. How to explain to people who continued their normal lives, taking care of chicks, planting sugar beets, what we had lived through there. Some scars you carry forever, scars that humanity should never have created. January 1917. After almost a year in Verdun, we received orders for rest and reorganization in a town called Troy, 200 kilometers from the battlefield. It was the first time in 11 months that I slept in a real bed, ate hot food, and bathed with clean water. But I discovered something terrible. After Verdun, peace was almost unbearable. My body had gotten used to the constant sound of artillery. In the silence of Troy, I would wake up at dawn and panic, thinking I had gone deaf. My muscles had adapted to the permanent tension of always being ready to throw myself on the ground. In a quiet town, I felt exposed, vulnerable, and there were the nightmares. Every night, I dreamed of a ghost, carrying me on his back, part of his face destroyed, of Jean-Claude disappearing in an explosion, of Pierre writing in his diary seconds before dying. I would wake up screaming, sweating, with my hands shaking uncontrollably. Military doctors had a name for this: war neurosis. They said it was lack of moral fiber or disguised cowardice. The standard treatment was rigorous military discipline and the threat of court-martial for cowardice in the face of the enemy. Today, you have another name for it. Back then, they called it shame. I received a 15-day leave to visit my family in Meaux. It was the first 15 days away from the war since 1914. It should have been a period of joy and reunion. It was one of the most difficult periods of my life. My hometown seemed to have shrunk. The streets I remembered as wide and busy now seemed narrow and provincial. People spoke too quietly. I had gotten used to shouting to be heard over the cannons. They moved too slowly. In Verdun, slow movements meant death. Papa had aged a lot. He worked alone on the farm because there were no young men to help. Mama cried every time she looked at me because I was no longer the son she had raised. And Celeste had married a local merchant in September 1915. "I thought you had died," she explained to me, crying. "We didn't receive letters for 6 months. Everyone said Verdun had been destroyed and there were no survivors." I didn't blame her. How could I? She had done what any sensible young woman would do, moved forward with life instead of waiting for a ghost. But the conversation that marked me most was with the priest of our church, Père Antoine. He had been a military chaplain and understood what I had been through. "Marcel," he told me after Sunday Mass, "you returned physically, but a part of you is still in Verdun and always will be." "How do I live with this?" I asked. "You don't live with it. You live through it. You use what you learned there to be a better man here. You honor the memory of those who died by being worthy of the life they lost." They were the wisest words anyone told me during the war. I returned to the army knowing I would never be the same, but also knowing I had a responsibility to the dead of Verdun. I couldn't waste the life that Auguste, Jean-Claude, Pierre, and so many others had given their lives to preserve. The war continued until November 1918. I participated in more battles. Aisne, Second Battle of the Marne, 100 Days Offensive. But nothing ever compared to Verdun. Verdun had been rock bottom of humanity. Everything else seemed manageable after that. When the armistice was signed on November 11, 1918, I was in a trench near Sedan. At 11 o'clock in the morning, the cannon stopped. Absolute silence. This time the silence was different. It wasn't the temporary pause between bombardments we had known for 4 years. It was permanent silence. The war had truly ended. I cried for the first time since Auguste died in my arms. I cried like a child, not from joy. I had lost the ability to feel pure joy. I cried from relief that I had survived when so many others couldn't. I returned to Meaux in December 1918. Papa had died of Spanish flu 3 weeks before the armistice. Mama was alone on the farm, trying to keep everything running with her own hands. I decided to stay and take care of her. I never married. Not because I couldn't love, but because I couldn't imagine bringing children into a world where Verdun was possible. I took care of Mama until she died. Then I took care of the farm alone until I got too old to work. For many years, I didn't talk about Verdun to anyone. When veterans gathered to tell war stories, I made excuses not to go. When journalists came to interview me about the Great War, I refused. Some memories are too heavy to share. But now, after so many decades, I feel I have an obligation to speak, not to glorify war. There's never anything glorious about young people killing other young people for meters of mud, but to remember the price of the freedom you enjoy today. Hundreds of thousands of men died or were wounded at Verdun. Hundreds of thousands of sons, husbands, fathers, brothers, hundreds of thousands of futures that never happened. Hundreds of thousands of reasons to never forget that war is always the last option, never the first. Auguste died carrying me on his back because he believed brothers don't abandon each other. Jean-Claude was vaporized by a German grenade while reciting poetry to distract us from fear. Pierre died writing in his diary that the sun rose again today because he wanted to believe each new day brought hope. They died so that France would remain free, so their families could live in peace, so children they would never meet could play in fields where there was no barbed wire or grenade craters. That's the true lesson of Verdun, that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary sacrifices when they fight for something greater than themselves, and that we, the survivors, have an obligation to honor those sacrifices by building a better world on the foundations of blood they paid. During World War II, when the Germans returned to invade France, many young people came to ask me whether they should resist or flee. I always answered, defend freedom, but never romanticize war. May courage always be that of preventing Verdun from happening again. Today, when I see children playing in the fields of Meaux, where I played so many decades ago, I think of Auguste, Jean-Claude, Pierre, and all the others. They never had children, never grew old, never saw the world at peace, but their deaths were not in vain because they allowed those children to have a childhood they could never have. You know, I've spent my whole life carrying Verdun inside me, in the silence of dawn, in the smell of rain on earth, in the faces of young men who remind me of those I lost. Some scars don't heal. They just become part of who you are. I still have Pierre's diary, the last entry written moments before he died. Cold morning, bad coffee, but the sun rose again today. That has to mean something. When I'm gone, it will be buried with me, as it should be, because some words are too precious to leave behind, and some friends deserve to rest together. But if my words today can make you understand that peace is not a gift, it's a choice we make every single day, then perhaps all this suffering had some meaning after all. Auguste, Jean-Claude, Pierre, they're waiting for me now. I can feel it, and when I finally meet them again, I want to tell them that I kept my promise, that I never forgot, that I made their sacrifice mean something. Au revoir, mes amis. May we meet again in a place where the only thunder is from summer storms, and the only thing that falls from the sky is rain.
If you had been Marcel's age in 1916, do you think you would have had the strength to survive Verdun? Tell us in the comments what you think kept these men going. Before we say goodbye, let me tell you what was real in Marcel's story. The Battle of Verdun, February to December 1916, truly happened. Over 700,000 men were killed or wounded in those 10 months. The German strategy of bleeding France white, the sacred way with its endless convoys, the 9-hour bombardment on February 21st, the rotation system created by General Pétain, all of this is documented history. Fort Douaumont did fall to the Germans. Villages like Fleury changed hands multiple times and were completely erased from the map. The conditions in the trenches, the rats, the trench foot, the constant bombardment, the war neurosis that broke men's minds, these horrors are recorded in thousands of soldiers' diaries and letters. What I created for you was Marcel himself, his voice, his friends Auguste, Jean-Claude, Pierre, Philippe, and André. These are composite characters built from real testimonies of Verdun survivors. The conversations, the personal moments, the specific scenes, these I dramatize to give human faces to the statistics. But the emotions, the fear, the camaraderie, the trauma, the guilt of surviving when others didn't, those were as real as the mud and blood of Verdun. Marcel Dubois is fiction. But the 700,000 men who suffered at Verdun were not. This story honors their memory. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to keep these memories alive.